First Minister, Deacon, Convener, ladies and gentlemen, my word, it does my heart good to see this room so crammed full. I'm Judith Patton. Many moons ago, had a crazy moment and decided to create All Energy. We have now grown and grown over the years. I would like to welcome all of you on behalf of Reed Exhibitions. Some housekeeping. I'm here to do the air hostess bit. There are no planned fire drills. If a fire alarm goes off, it's the real thing. So follow the green men and take advice from the stewards who will see you in a safe place. Now, not so many years ago, I waved my phone on high, and at that point it started to ring. It was a new one, and I hadn't a clue what to do, so I chucked it into the audience and said, please somebody deal with it. But could you get your phone out and make sure that it's on silent, because you can tweet, but no phone calls, please. I've got lots of thanks to say, but on the screen earlier, you will have seen logos from key players in All Energy. I would like to thank our headline sponsors, Shepherd and Wedderburn, who are just a joy to deal with. I would like to thank our supporting organizations, our sponsors. I'd like to thank our exhibitors, our visitors, and indeed, members of the press. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We have a really exciting 2 days for you. Just a few facts and figures. We have up to 400 exhibiting companies from 16 countries. We have, it sounds silly to say plus minus 400 speakers, but I never quite get round to counting them. And all packed into 2 days. After this plenary session today, we break into 10 parallel streams. Tomorrow, after the Brexit plenary session, we break into 9. And of course, this year, for the first time, we also have our Smart Urban Mobility Solutions Conference. And when you go into the exhibition, you'll see a splendid display of low-carbon vehicles ramming home that particular message. Most of all, I would like to wish you an extraordinarily productive time with us. And we would like your feedback. We have grown the show over the years, but we've done it with your help. We want to know what is good and that you enjoy. We want to know how you think we can improve. So please don't be backward in coming forward. We want you to improve our show with us. It gives me great pleasure to now hand over to a very special friend of All Energy, Professor Sir Jim McDonald. And Jim will be chairing this session. And so it's over to you, Jim.
Thank you very much, Judith, and a very warm welcome, ladies and gentlemen. First Minister, a particularly warm welcome to you as our distinguished guest for this first session, and to all of you for filling the hall and the exhibition area, and more of that later on. So, the City of Glasgow is absolutely delighted to be hosting All Energy these days. It's absolutely fitting, given the intensity of the renewable energy and engineering capability around this city, and it gives me great pleasure to invite our first speaker to give you a welcome on behalf of the city, and that is Keith Brown, OBE. Keith is Deacon Convener of the Trades House of Glasgow, and please join me now in welcoming Keith to give you a welcome on behalf of the city. Thank you very much indeed.
Mr. Chairman, First Minister, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, you may be surprised an Englishman is welcoming you to this great city of Glasgow. Well, this, of course, is an international conference in an international city. The merchants and craftsmen played a major role in building the strong Glasgow, which at one time was the second city of the empire. By a letter of Gildry subsequently confirmed by an Act of Parliament, the Lord Dean of the Guild of the Merchants' House and the Deacon of the Trades House made members of the council. That position still continues today, and we are recognised as the second and third sisters of Glasgow, supporting the Lord Provost at civic events and welcoming citizens visitors to the city. We still attend council meetings, but we have no voting or speaking rights. Elections were held last week. Until a new provost is elected later this month, the Lord Dean of Guild and myself, as Deacon Convener, carry out the civic duties. In this capacity, it is my privilege and pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the City of Glasgow today. This is the third year for All Energy at this Scottish event campus, and we hope it will continue to grow here for many more years as its natural home in Glasgow. The city has a rich heritage of engineering and innovation, adding a strong entrepreneurial spirit and a world-class educational sector. We have all the ingredients of a powerful urban economy. Indeed, Glasgow was one of the first of the preeminent cities of the global industrial revolution. Now we look to lower carbon forms of economic growth in a green industrial revolution. We know we need to do our bit to lower our carbon emissions, but we fundamentally believe that a more environmentally sustainable city is commensurate with economic and sustainable profits for our businesses. They are all part of our green print for a better Glasgow. In this light, decision of our friends, All Energy, to base the UK's biggest renewable and low-carbon event here in Glasgow is all the more welcome. All Energy came first here in 2015, during Glasgow's own celebration of its ever first green year, making a really positive fit for an event and a city that are both clearly directed to the challenges of building a low-carbon future. As someone with a long background in finance, industry and the public sectors, I'm acutely aware of the need for Scotland and its citizens to embrace the opportunities presented by green economic growth. All Energy helps us to reflect on these opportunities in this conference sessions, to connect with each other in the exhibition hall, to explore new market potential during your days by the Clyde. That is good for the city. It is good for the local, national and international businesses gathered here. It is good for our friends of organised this conference and the exhibition just next door. That is why Glasgow is the only UK city in the top 10 of the prestigious Global Sustainable Destination Index. In that light, Glasgow and Scotland both enjoy a well-deserved international reputation for work to decarbonise our energy use and build a greener economy. It is something we are particularly proud of, and I know too that Glasgow is keen to play its part in supporting the national ambitions for a low-carbon Scotland. It is really important that the market can have confidence in the future direction of travel for our local and national commitments around energy and emissions. It is really fortunate that Glasgow and Scotland are able to offer that. We have a strong alignment of policy between our city and the Scottish Government. Indeed, it is a distinct and valuable asset which contributes to our joint success. The City of Glasgow is proud to work with All Energy as a tangible sign of that support. I would like all of you to invite you to a civic reception this evening at the Science Centre at 6 o'clock. We will continue to work with All Energy to help it grow even more in this great city. I hope that all of you will even more be inspired to contribute to a sustainable Glasgow in a greener Scotland. Ladies and gentlemen, please enjoy this conference, the exhibition, and your stay in Glasgow. Back home, when you go back to your cities, tell the world that Glasgow is a welcoming and vibrant city, offering outstanding conference facilities, world-class sporting events, an abundance of culture and arts, and outstanding universities. If I was to adapt our motto today, it would let a more sustainable Glasgow flourish. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, thank you very much, Keith, for that warm welcome. And just to reiterate, the Civic reception tonight should be something that the visitors to the city should really enjoy. But let me just make some opening remarks, colleagues. First of all, to note the high quality of our opening panel session from the political perspective, economic impact and the technologies that are so important to reimagine and redesign the energy systems of the future. So formally, First Minister, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to All Energy here in Glasgow. And this conference has undoubtedly become one of the mainstays for renewable energy and the associated technologies and policy issues, not only in the UK, but across the EU. And that's great credit to the organisers as well as to all of you who participate. And it's great to see the numbers that we have here in this opening session and the many others that are currently waiting for us to visit them on the exhibition stands. As Judith indicated, it's worthwhile just reflecting the genesis of this event. Judith and other colleagues conceived of it back in 2001 when it was staged in Aberdeen for the first time. In February, as it happens, and I remember that conference because it was snowing heavily and it stopped a number of us getting there on time. So they decided naturally to come down to the balmy climes of Glasgow. For those of you who've been in the city for the past couple of days, I can probably see the sunburned noses around the place. But of course today a little bit cooler, unseasonably cold today for this time of the year, but I'm sure it gives us opportunities in solar energy as we go forward. But in 2011, Reed Exhibitions acquired the conference, and I, along with others, were engaged with Reed and the organisers to talk about bringing the conference to Glasgow. And here we are, as we heard, the third session, as Keith mentioned, of the conference being staged here in Glasgow. And I have to say, Judith has an uncanny knack of coordinating this conference with electoral activity. The first time we were here, it was the UK general election in 2015. Last year with the Scottish elections, and of course we're just between the council elections and the next general election. So coupled with my professor of politics, John Curtis, have a word with Judith Patton to get a line on for next year's conference. We can imagine what electoral activities we might have then. But of course, we've had an interesting year in energy, and that's euphemistic. Many of you are there. Some of the policy, let me use the right euphemism, perturbations that we've had across Europe, North America, brings us to have some real thinking about the role of hydrocarbons, renewables, the need to reinvest in the energy systems. Some very short headlines amongst many. Just last month, for the first time since 1882, Britain supplied its electricity demand without contribution from our coal stations. A remarkable moment, and our colleague and friend, Cordy O'Hara from National Grid, was quoted as saying that this was a watershed moment in how our energy systems are changing. Of course, wind, gas and nuclear provided the energy on that day, but it gave us a clear signal that the systems that were conceived of back at the start of the 20th century are now evolving and have to evolve. Technological push, economic drivers, and of course, last but not least, the importance of tackling climate change and global warming. In November, we had a little taste of what it means for energy supplies to have an impact, not just in rural communities, but in November, the tail end of November last year, the west end of London was blacked out for about 4 years. Now, that was down to a cable fault, but we often think that the large-scale storms that sometimes traverse the country and our utilities work hard and successfully to make sure that supplies are restored. Disruption happens out there, outside the cities. But here is an idea that although it was a cable fault, this is what happens when network resilience is challenged. And for me, it highlights the absolute need for network investment and taking a new approach to imagining networks of the future, large-scale transmission infrastructure, but the idea of distributed generation, important. Also, last September, interestingly, in other parts of the world, we had the statewide blackout in southern Australia down to the heat wave that they had and the cooling load that was required and the mismatch between generation and demand. Major disruption. And of course, with consummate commercial focus, Elon Musk appeared and talked about the opportunity for the Powerwall and the Power Pack products, that he could solve the problem in 100 days. Now, Elon is a consummate technological entrepreneur, but he's also a great sales and marketing man, so who knows if that could be done. But nonetheless, what it is telling us that storage is there, storage technologies are evolving, and this idea of low carbon energy, grid redesign and evolution, and storage. This is a disruptive integration that we need to think about, and this is the conference that should be driving some of that thinking, bringing together technologists, policymakers and investors. And of course we will hear, I'm sure, in due course from the First Minister about the Scottish Government challenging this nation to engage in a conversation and a consultation around our own vision for energy systems. Scotland is exemplary in the way that we tie research excellence, industrial innovation, and try to make ourselves a reference point globally for imagining what energy systems should look like over the next 10, 20 years and beyond. Because hydrocarbons are there as well. I mean, over the past year since we last met, there's been a 40% or so uplift in the price of oil. And that has a big impact on that industry, has a big impact on energy prices per se. But with OPEC pulling back production, that pushed the price, and you've seen just in the past 2 weeks the volatility of the price of a barrel of oil, and that impacts on production, it impacts on how we generate and use electricity. So in many ways, we need to think now in energy systems, not only of electricity production, although that's fundamental, but how we integrate electricity production, heating and cooling, load and supply, and transport, and taking that integrated approach. So for me, the exciting point for this conference is we really stand at the threshold of making a difference. Aging assets, new policy imperatives, and the opportunity to make investments that will give good returns for society and for those that seek to grow GVA. This is important. And what I would say, just as I close, is that the nexus that you heard Keith talking about, great research, great industrial opportunities, and focused and ambitious policymakers. I will point out that Scotland has one of Europe's most intense and high-quality research community. I have the privilege of chairing the Energy Technology Partnership, which was established in 2008. It's an alliance of 12 of Scotland's research-intensive institutions. We have about 250 academics and over 700 researchers, almost 1,000 academics, considering how we're going to make an impact, not just for Scotland, but across the globe in a range of activities, funded by Scottish Government and its agencies, as well as competitively winning Research Council money. We attract the world's best into Scotland, but we're trying to translate our research to make an impact. We have already 95 PhD students in the ET programme. We're looking to build that in the coming months. And we have 11 thematic areas, many of which are represented across the conference's very focused activities and well aligned with the Scottish Government priorities in energy systems, heat, wind, marine, energy conversion and storage, oil and gas, carbon capture and storage, solar, bioenergy, grid, and energy utilisation in buildings. They are in Stand G20, a very appropriate terminology for the economic impact. Go and speak to them. The academic contribution to industrial innovation, creating great talent, because we don't often speak enough, and we should emphasise this will be predicated on high-quality people making a difference, whether it's in policy making, investment or technology. Go and have a word with the ETP. It's the most intense energy research community in Europe. Go and make their acquaintance. Anyway, I will stop there, colleagues, and we'll now begin the various contributions. And I'm absolutely delighted. Our first contribution is from First Minister, the Right Honourable Nicola Sturgeon MSP, who's made time out of an extraordinarily busy diary, and none more so than the past few weeks. Please join me in welcoming the First Minister to the stage. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Jim. Thank you to you, Deacon Convener, for your warm civic welcome to the City of Glasgow. And thank you to everybody here for being with us today. I'm absolutely delighted that I'm able to be here at what, of course, is the UK's largest low-carbon and renewable energy event. There's no doubt that it is extremely fitting that we meet for this conference on the banks of the River Clyde, not just because of the sunshine. And for those of you who are visiting Glasgow, it always is sunny in Glasgow. Don't let anybody ever tell you otherwise. But it's fitting for other reasons, for more important reasons, because the work that took place here in the 18th and 19th centuries in our shipyards, factories and mills put Scotland at the forefront of the Industrial Revolution. And now, as we find ourselves in another period of hugely significant change as the world embarks upon a low-carbon revolution, Scotland is again emerging as a real world leader. Back in 2009, the Scottish Parliament set some of the most ambitious carbon emission targets anywhere in the world. And I'm delighted to say that we have already met those 2020 targets 6 years ahead of schedule. And that is undoubtedly helping us to meet our moral obligations when it comes to climate change. But it is also bringing to Scotland really significant economic benefits and opportunities as well. Our low carbon and renewable sector now accounts for almost 60,000 jobs across our country and has a turnover of £10.5 billion. So we want to build on that success. We are determined here in Scotland to develop our low carbon and renewables sector even further. And of course, we also want to continue to support our oil and gas industry. So that's why earlier this year we published our draft energy strategy. And what that does is set out our long-term plan to create an integrated low-carbon energy system, one that will benefit our economy, our environment and the people of this country. And today I want to speak about that plan. I want to talk about how we will meet Scotland's future energy needs and how we intend to transform our energy consumption. But I also want to talk about some of the very real challenges facing the energy sector. And finally, I'll speak about our support for local energy solutions. Now, when it comes to the future of our energy supply, our aim is crystal clear. We want renewable energy sources to play the major role in meeting Scotland's energy needs. Now, at the moment, renewables generate almost 54% of Scotland's electricity demand. In terms of our overall energy consumption for electricity, heat and transport, around 15% is currently met by renewables. And it's important to point out that that figure has more than doubled since 2009. And in our draft energy strategy, we proposed a new target. We want renewable sources to meet the equivalent of 50% of Scotland's total energy needs by 2030. Now, I don't have to tell anybody in this audience that that's a hugely ambitious target, but it does reflect the immense confidence we have in Scotland's renewables sector, and it reflects our strengths across the range of different technologies. Now, as all of you know, our primary source of renewable electricity is onshore wind. If you leave this building and look south, you can see the turbines of Whiteley Wind Farm. That's the largest of its kind in the UK and one of the largest anywhere in Europe. And that's just one of many across Scotland. In fact, our current and consented onshore capacity is enough to power the needs of Scottish households twice over. So that's why we're so determined to ensure that onshore wind has a viable route to market. And as part of that, we've called for Scotland to become the first area in the UK to host a subsidy-free onshore wind farm. Now, that's a challenge to the industry, but it's also an indication of our commitment to secure the future of onshore wind in Scotland. Of course, as well as onshore wind, our offshore capacity is also hugely impressive. Scotland accounts for 25% of Europe's total offshore wind resource. Later this summer, the world's largest floating offshore wind farm will be deployed off the coast of Peterhead, and next year an even bigger one will be constructed at Kincardine in the northeast. Scotland is also at the forefront of developing marine renewables. Just last month, the world's most powerful tidal turbine developed by the Orkney firm Scott Renewables reached peak power at the European Marine Energy Centre in Orkney. And over the past couple of years, Wave Energy Scotland has committed almost £25 million for a series of groundbreaking wave technology projects. So it's very clear that across wind, wave and tidal, not to mention hydro and solar as well, Scotland's renewable sector really is a global leader. And by setting our new all-energy target, we're aiming to ensure that that continues and that all of us can reap the benefit of that. Of course, alongside our support for renewables, it is important that we continue to support our oil and gas sector. As the International Panel on Climate Change has noted, during the low-carbon transition, hydrocarbons will continue to help meet the world's energy needs. So a secure supply of oil and gas, of course produced to the highest, least polluting standards, will be an important part of Scotland's energy mix for a long time to come. So that's why we're committed to maximising recovery of oil and gas from Scottish waters, and it's why we have continued to press the UK government for a competitive and stable fiscal and regulatory regime. It's also why we continue to support the industry amid the current challenges that it faces through initiatives like our Energy Jobs Task Force and our Transition Training Fund. After all, our oil and gas sector is not just a hugely important part of our economy, supporting over 120,000 jobs. The industry's key strengths in terms of expertise, infrastructure and supply chain are also a huge asset to the wider energy sector. It's environmentally and economically essential that we harness all of those strengths to support new low-carbon technologies and energy sources. For example, the experience of our oil and gas industry in working offshore is clearly of real relevance to our offshore wind sector. And that's just one of many ways in which the oil and gas sector can contribute to the growing success of our low-carbon economy. Of course, ensuring that Scotland has a reliable low-carbon energy supply is just one part of our strategy. We're equally focused on transforming the way that we use energy. And I'll give just two examples of that. The first concerns energy efficiency. We know that increasing energy efficiency helps to lower energy bills, reduce fuel poverty, and maximise the competitiveness of our businesses. So we have taken the deliberate step of making energy efficiency a national infrastructure priority. We've committed £500 million to Scotland's energy efficiency programme over the next 4 years. And that money will be used to implement energy efficiency measures in homes and businesses right across the country. And I think that's a very good example of an investment which definitely benefits the environment, but that is also good for families and businesses right across Scotland. The second example I think it's important to highlight is transport. We know we need to reduce emissions from road travel. That is a vital part of meeting our climate change targets, but it's also hugely important to protecting public health. And that's why we are seeking to be at the forefront of innovation when it comes to low or zero carbon fuels like hydrogen. In fact, Europe's largest fleet of hydrogen fuel cell buses is currently in operation on the roads of Aberdeen. And it's also why we set a new target in our draft energy strategy that by 2032, 40% of all new cars sold will be ultra low emission vehicles. We're already building the infrastructure that will be necessary to achieve and support that. Our network of EV charge points is one of the most comprehensive in Europe, and we will continue to develop that. But alongside that, we also continue through the Energy Savings Trust to provide interest-free loans to consumers and businesses for the purchase of electric vehicles. So that's just one part of our comprehensive agenda to reduce Scotland's transport emissions. And along with our investment in energy efficiency, that will contribute to the long-term transformation of our energy use. Now, while we are underlining, and I hope I am underlining for you today, our ambitions for the future, we also must recognise, in a spirit of frankness, that our energy sector faces very real challenges. I've already mentioned the challenges facing our oil and gas industry. But over the past couple of years, there's no avoiding the fact that the low-carbon and renewables sector has also suffered some setbacks. For example, our ability to develop carbon capture and storage has been badly damaged by the UK government's decision to remove £1 billion of funding from the Peterhead demonstrator project. Our offshore oil and gas fields are potentially the largest carbon storage resource in Europe. And we also have a huge amount of expertise in the oil and gas sector and its supply chain. So Scotland should be, and very much is, a natural centre for this vital new technology. but proving the commercial viability of carbon capture and storage, and of course Scotland's own capabilities, is absolutely essential. That wouldn't just help us to lower emissions from power generation and heavy industry, it's also hugely important when we look at future trends in energy generation. Carbon capture and storage, I think, has an important role to play in ensuring that hydrogen is a truly sustainable fuel source. Now, I welcome today's announcement that EU funds have been awarded to the ACORN project. This initiative will explore how oil and gas infrastructure in Aberdeenshire could be used for carbon capture and storage. And in doing so, it aims to show how a vibrant carbon capture and storage industry could develop in Scotland. But the UK government's approach continues to be an obstacle to us fully realising these opportunities. And of course, carbon capture is just one example of that. Our energy sector has also been damaged by the early closure of the Renewables obligation, significant changes to contracts of difference, and the drawn-out cancellation of the levy control framework. In addition, progress on island interconnectors has stalled as a result of the UK government's inaction, and support for renewables seems to come a poor second to investment in new nuclear power stations. So, as Jim commented earlier on, we are, as we always seem to be at the moment, in an election campaign across the UK. There'll be many issues debated in that campaign, but one of the things I think is important that we see as a result of this campaign are strong voices that are going to be champions of the jobs and investment that renewable energy has already delivered to Scotland and can deliver even more in the future. I think that's also an important point when we consider where we are in terms of Brexit. The decision of the UK government to leave the single market has obvious implications for our energy sector. Scotland, along with the rest of the UK, has benefited from binding EU climate change targets, removing the competitive pressure between countries to lower standards. EU funding has also supported some of our most ambitious renewables projects, including the Beatrice wind farm, which is set to receive £525 million from the European Investment Bank. And of course, single market membership has helped us to attract significant energy investment as part of an emerging single energy market. Brexit, and in particular, I think, removal from the single market, potentially puts all of that at risk. And there is still a lack of clarity over how or even whether it is proposed that we would remain part of the single European energy market. There is, I think, a real risk that being outside the EU will drive up energy costs, and for investors, there will be questions as to whether the UK remains an attractive location for investment. So against that backdrop, it becomes all the more important to champion the developments and the potential developments that we are here talking about today. And I want to make very clear to you today that the Scottish Government will continue to do everything we can to protect our interests in this regard and to try to mitigate any damage caused by the policy approaches of the UK Government. That's why we're determined to continue to provide direction and leadership on energy issues, and to provide the support and investment that help make those ambitions a reality. And it's why we will always be a strong voice for Scotland's energy industry, here at home, elsewhere in the UK and globally. Now, so far, I've talked about our national policy ambitions and some of the challenges we faced. I've focused on the action we're taking to modernise our energy supply and change the way we use energy. But of course, we're also looking to support and encourage local energy solutions. We want to harness the skills and the ideas and the resources of communities right across the country, because the benefits of this are potentially transformational. Local energy systems, as we know, can help to provide secure, sustainable and affordable energy that meets the specific needs of different communities. And by supporting a culture of energy innovation, we can keep Scotland at the forefront of the low-carbon revolution. So that's why we are providing £43 million of new funding for 13 renewable and low-carbon energy projects across Scotland. That's part of our low-carbon infrastructure transition programme, which is joint funded by the European Union. And today we're announcing some of the projects that have been selected to benefit from that funding. Some of them are led by community energy companies, some are led by private companies, others are led by local authorities. They include a scheme in Stirling that uses the biogas from wastewater to produce heat and power, a project on Fair Isle to create a standalone energy system incorporating wind, solar and battery storage. Another project involves installing a heat pump on the site of a former shipyard in Clydebank, about 5 miles away from here, helping to provide low-carbon heating for more than 1,000 homes. So the projects support good ideas, but they also have the potential to directly benefit specific communities and businesses. And of course, as we learn lessons from their implementation, they could bring wider benefits to the whole of Scotland as well. And these local projects are a further example, I hope, of the scale of our ambition for Scotland's energy future. We are absolutely determined that Scotland will play our full part in reducing carbon emissions and tackling climate change. We're determined to build a modern, secure energy system that creates jobs and strengthens our economy. And we want our energy sector to be a world leader across all forms of energy. The truth is, we have all of the raw materials here in Scotland that we need to achieve these ambitions. Per head of population, we're one of the most energy-rich nations in Europe. We've retained many of our traditional strengths in construction, manufacturing and engineering. And of course, with 5 universities ranked among the top 200 in the world, we also boast an outstanding science and research base. But for all those advantages, we know and we have a real recognition that there's nothing inevitable about Scotland realising our energy potential. It's the decisions we make now and the direction we take that will determine whether we use these raw materials to fulfil and realise that ambition. And my pledge today on behalf of the Scottish Government is that we will continue to do all we can to support the energy sector through the current challenges, and we will do everything we can to help you seize the opportunities for innovation and growth. Because I believe that notwithstanding the challenges we face, the opportunities outweigh those challenges. And if we work together with a clear sense of direction, a clear sense of leadership, I am convinced we can turn those raw advantages into reality and make Scotland's energy ambitions a reality for the benefit of Scotland, but also for the benefit of the world overall as well. So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to share my thoughts with you today. There's no doubt your deliberations today and tomorrow will be of huge importance to the Scottish Government as we take forward our ambitions. Please enjoy the rest of the conference and the exhibition, and enjoy everything the wonderful City of Glasgow has to offer you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, First Minister. Very stimulating and lots of food for thought, which leads us neatly into our second presenter. And it's great to have Keith Anderson back again. Keith has been a regular contributor to this event, and many of you will know Keith's high-profile contributions to the industry and his attempts to make appropriate impacts to policy and investment. Keith is Chief Corporate Officer of ScottishPower and Chief Executive Officer of ScottishPower Renewables. Please join me now in welcoming Keith to the podium. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you. And here was me thinking all those people had come to listen to me, but there we go. All right. We'll not worry about that. Welcome. It's great to see so many people here, and I just join in congratulating Judith and the team for putting on another fantastic conference. It really is one of the best, I think, one of the best energy conferences anywhere in the UK. So congratulations to everybody in the team. I had a bloody awful day yesterday. I don't know about anybody else in the energy sector, but yesterday was probably not one of the greatest days that we've ever had. It is, as you are all fully aware, election season, which, as usual, means some uncertain times, and no doubt, as we saw yesterday, policies being decided at the last minute. One of the good examples of that is the government publishing their industrial strategy back in January, which focused on 10 pillars to help drive forward the UK's economy. Now, it was great to see that energy was one of the key pillars that the government wanted to look at in terms of its industrial strategy, and in that they clearly signalled that they wanted affordability to take the priority when it came to achieving and resolving the energy trilemma. Yesterday, that part of the industrial strategy was transformed way beyond being a strategy, and it was quite clearly turned into an election campaign and a policy pledge. And yes, I would say quite clearly, I agree, absolutely agree with the government that the Competition and Markets Authority didn't go far enough to protect energy customers. I'll repeat that. I absolutely agree with the government that the Competition and Market Authority didn't go far enough to protect customers. However, to help customers, you actually need to look at the whole of the energy sector, the entire value chain. You cannot just pick one part of the energy value chain and try and fix everything by fixing energy prices. And I'll give a few examples. Onshore wind, as you've already heard, is the cheapest form of renewable energy. It's been hugely successful right across the whole of the UK and particularly in Scotland. Yet we appear to have a UK government that is allergic to onshore wind. And we don't really know why, and they aren't very good at explaining the reasons. There is a never-ending stream of evidence that lots of communities like and are perfectly welcoming of onshore wind. The majority of our customers want renewable energy, so we must work hard and continue to lobby for a mechanism that allows the continued investment in onshore wind. Because if, like us, this government truly wants to look for clean energy in the most cost-effective way for the benefit of customers, then surely, like us, this government must know that onshore wind has to be part of the future of the energy sector in the UK. As regards offshore wind, we're making huge progress in the offshore wind sector. We as a company are now starting to construct our 714 megawatt East Anglia 1 project. The construction started. We're doing it on the back of having secured a UK supply chain content of over 50%, and we're doing it at the lowest ever cost for an offshore wind farm in the UK for the benefit of customers right across the whole of the UK. And the offshore wind sector is becoming more and more competitive, with prices being driven down harder and faster. Not that long ago, offshore wind was up at 160, 170 pounds a megawatt hour. When we won our contract for East Anglia 1, it took it down to 119 pounds, and the auction this summer, lots of people expecting to see that price go down to or below 90 pounds a megawatt hour. So we are now, without doubt and without any argument, delivering huge-scale renewable energy projects at an incredibly cost-effective price for customers. Yet we have a policy in the UK which continues to want to support nuclear power development at a price that will be significantly higher than any other form of generation on the system in the UK at £95 a megawatt hour. And when it's finally complete in about 10 years' time, I think it's worth asking, how good a deal will that be for customers? And in terms of thermal generation, on the 21st of April this year, the UK celebrated its first ever working day without any coal power since the Industrial Revolution. National Grid reported that the record low was a sign of things to come, with coal-free days becoming more and more common in the UK as we phase out that polluting form of generation. Coal only accounted for 9% of electricity generation in 2016. So one of the things we're asking for is we're asking the government to stop supporting coal in the capacity auctions. Why? Because we believe customers shouldn't be asked to pay to support old coal plant to stay on the system at the cost of preventing investment in the build of new, efficient, lower-cost gas generation on the system. And that will provide greater system stability, security, low-cost energy for future generations, and that is for the benefit of customers. In this industry, we're already working hard to ensure we continue to drive investment, create sustainable business plans, and deliver a future of clean, reliable, and affordable energy. We do this through the use of strong and stable market frameworks that allow competition to flourish, and they deliver huge investment at the most cost-efficient possible rate for all customers. So when the government come to look at retail pricing, we would ask that some rationale is applied to that process. For retail customers, the Conservatives have asked the right question, but quite clearly they have come to the wrong answer. ScottishPower have been campaigning to abolish unfair standard variable tariffs altogether from the UK market. Getting rid of standard variable tariffs will end the status quo in the market. It will increase competition, and it will save much more than the much bandied about £100 for hard-working families. Right now, by failing to address some of the issues around onshore wind, nuclear power, and the standard variable tariff, our government risk only addressing symptoms and not the underlying root cause. The next government has to tackle the root cause of the problem. It needs to boost competition and abolish standard variable tariffs. I thought yesterday was probably best summed up by The Guardian, and one of the correspondents in The Guardian wrote, "The problem is that the Tory fix is like giving in to a toddler having a tantrum. You save yourself some short-term grief, but you're not encouraging the behaviour you want in the long term." What we want is we want this new government in their policies and in their Brexit negotiations to be seen to be creating competition and creating opportunities, not threats. Threats don't encourage competition, and threats don't bring down cost. Because it's only through opportunity and competition that we will create a complete energy system that is the benefit for all customers. Thank you.
Discuss. I'm sure we'll be doing lots of that in the margins, colleagues, and again, shows the uncanny timing of all energy in terms of, shall we say, major disruptions to the energy industry and policy matters. Keith, thank you very much again for that challenging presentation. So, again, back to the city which is hosting us today. We're proud of what the city, its leadership, has been trying to do here over recent years, and I'm delighted to welcome George Gillespie from the Glasgow City Council, who is Acting Executive Director of Land and Environmental Services, to talk you through the Glasgow vision on energy and sustainability. Ladies and gentlemen, George Gillespie.
Deacon, Convener, ladies and gentlemen, very good morning to you all. For me, it's a great privilege and a real pleasure for me to address you this morning at the 3rd All Energy Conference hosted by Glasgow here on the banks of the River Clyde. I would like you to think about 3 words: ambitious, innovative, and transformational. And for me, that best describes Glasgow. As the First Minister mentioned, this very site once exported goods of iron and steel to the whole world. And now we are building a new green economy which is being established as part of a smart cities revolution with low carbon growth at its very heart. Glasgow is home to the largest number of renewable jobs in Scotland, and I think that again is a tangible sign of market confidence in the skills of our city workforce and the network of business connections which Glasgow can offer. The City Council will continue to work to foster a business environment which encourages green economic growth with skilled and ambitious young people who can benefit from and generate further green market opportunities. Let me tell you first about how Glasgow has contributed to and benefited from the national agenda. The city itself has achieved 90% of our carbon emissions reduction target for the year 2020. In reality, this is equivalent to nearly 329,000 return flights to Sydney. And I can stand here today confident in saying that we will meet and certainly exceed our 2020 target. Indeed, our new £150 million Glasgow Recycling and Renewable Energy Centre, better known as the GREC, based in Paulmedy in the city, and working in partnership with our partners Viridor, will alone remove 90,000 tonnes of carbon emissions each year, as well as divert 90% of waste from our landfill, together generating enough electricity to power 25,000 homes in the city. This project, I think, demonstrates how a city like Glasgow is working towards a set of shared ambitions with the Scottish Government to decarbonise our energy supplies, especially heat. The National Energy Strategy gives us direction, purpose and ambition to move the city forward, as well as providing guidance on the kind of city and country we are looking to build. Our Sustainable Glasgow Partnership is our local vehicle for addressing these major issues, and we are committed to taking up the challenge set by the Paris Climate Change Agreement and more recently through the Scottish Climate Change Plan. This will certainly mean setting more ambitious carbon reduction targets for the city for 2025 and beyond. Indeed, there are encouraging signs from recent years that Glasgow has seen economic growth with no corresponding growth in carbon emissions. As a council, we will continue to invest in low-carbon technologies, as well as encouraging behaviour change amongst our own staff. We are currently in the midst of a major replacement programme for our street lighting network with energy-efficient LED lanterns, and these will reduce our energy usage by up to 52%. We do acknowledge our responsibility as a council, both to set a good example and to act in a leadership role for the city. We've published our own Energy and Carbon Master Plan, which sets out a roadmap to a low-carbon future and provides an insight to the market in terms of our ambitions. As a result, we are now engaged in a major transformational programme to maximise the potential for renewable energy generation. This includes putting solar PV panels on our primary school roofs, and as I speak here today, another 10 schools are included within that programme. I'm certainly keen that we look to all power potential generation opportunities for renewable energy. We are therefore preparing an in-river hydro installation in Pollock Country Park, which will generate renewable energy for use on the site within Pollock House and the Borough Collection. We are looking too at specific locations across the city for small-scale wind turbines, which are suited to the particular challenges of an urban environment. The Council has again increased its electric vehicle fleet at the same time as we've added more on-street charging points for the public. We are interested in the potential for hydrogen fuel cell technology, and we are watching with interest how this works in practice, as the First Minister mentioned in Aberdeen. We are certainly well aware each tonne of carbon we save means a saving in energy use, and I'm proud of the work of our own carbon management team within the City Council. Our work involves not just low carbon hardware, but also smart grid technologies and building management systems. The business case for a low energy economy is equally as strong as the environmental case, and I can see the results of that in the day-to-day life of the City Council. We are helping to lead on a major EU Horizon programme called Ruggedised, which you can hear more about later in the conference programme. And this in itself will develop an exemplar smart energy district in Glasgow, which will deliver multiple social, economic, environmental and business benefits. In this light, I particularly want to welcome the First Minister's announcement this morning of funding for 2 innovative projects for Glasgow through the Scottish Government's Low Carbon Infrastructure Transition Programme. They both involve a major investment in heat pump technology. One will draw heat from the River Clyde to supply a district heating network in the Gorbals, And that, for me, is a really good example of bringing a relatively underutilised city asset into productive use. The other is going to recover heat from the sewage system to supply our own Kelvin Grove Art Gallery and Museum. And I don't know if I'll tell my colleagues in Glasgow Life that. But I suppose it represents a novel use of traditional and sustainable urban supply of energy. Glasgow was one of the first cities in Europe to be admitted to the Rockefeller Foundation's prestigious network of 100 resilient cities. The global conversation which is taking place between those cities is one in which issues of energy security, low carbon growth and climate change are to the fore. Glasgow is also an active partner in both the UK Core Cities Group and the Scottish Cities Alliance. And indeed, I look forward to welcoming a meeting of the Scottish Cities Low Carbon Policy Hub in a month's time here in Glasgow. And we're also lead on the Core Cities agenda for developing our urban futures as smart cities. I'm certainly proud that my department, Land and Environmental Services, within the City Council, hosts the 8 City programme on behalf of the Scottish Cities Alliance. This significant partnership is a major step forward in making a reality of our smart city ambitions. I think it is vital that we take the opportunities offered by the transformation to a low-carbon economy. Businesses in Glasgow are at the very forefront of this, led by our colleagues from the Glasgow Chamber of Commerce and its Green Business Network. Glasgow also enjoys an increasing amount of conferences and events on low-carbon sustainable agendas. And indeed, from today, all energy, and over the next 4 weeks alone, green conference traffic in the city will bring more than £10 million of inward investment. In conclusion, we know that a low-carbon future is essentially related to a high quality of urban life. A cleaner environment, a more sustainable city, together with well-paid green jobs, all contribute to a city where residents, visitors and investors can enjoy a world-class quality of life and enjoy a city which is ambitious, innovative, transformational, and for me, ultimately successful. These are the reasons why All Energy first came here 3 years ago and remain the reasons why I hope you will return to the city for many more years to come. With that, I would like to thank you for the opportunity of speaking to you here this morning. I hope you all enjoy the conference, the city itself, and most important of all, as Jim mentioned, the great weather that we're currently experiencing. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You can see there's a recurrent theme on the weather. We're as surprised as everyone else. But George, thank you very much for that. And our next speaker, we're delighted to welcome here at All Energy, and that's Jim Watson. Jim is a Professor of Energy Policy at the University of Sussex, and today he is joining us for this session in his capacity as Director of the UK Energy Research Centre, or UKERC, as we refer to it as. And Jim is going to talk to us about the industrial strategy that's been referred earlier on in this session. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Jim Watson to the podium. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jim, and thank you very much for the invitation to speak. Good morning, everybody. So, for those of you who don't know, the UK Energy Research Centre is publicly funded by the research councils. We have researchers across the UK working on the transition to a sustainable energy system, including quite a few colleagues here in Glasgow, in Edinburgh and in Aberdeen. There's a stand outside for the Research Council's energy programme that funds my centre and many others, including a lot of more specialist technical centres, so please do go and visit them. So I'm going to talk about the Industrial Strategy Green Paper, which of course the implementation of which is on pause now because of the election season, but we'll see what happens after that. I'm going to talk about 3 things in the 15 minutes I have. Why industrial strategy is important and has come onto the agenda. What should its overall features be? What should it be trying to do across the board? And then particularly, what does it really mean for energy, and what should it mean for the energy sector? So first on why industrial strategy. It's something which I've been pleased to see has come up the political agenda from most political parties over the last 10 years or so, starting with the Labour administrations at UK government. Here in Scotland, it's been a constant theme. And actually, rather surprisingly, even the Conservative Party have decided that industrial strategy is something they want to talk about again and think about again. And the importance for energy, really, as many speakers have already said, is the change that this sector is experiencing. And the question is, how can the UK, Scotland, and individual localities and regions take advantage of those rapid changes? My own version just reflects on what's happened since I started my career around 25, 30 years ago. So one example is the amount of wind power we now have globally. If you go back to about 1990, we had about 2.5 gigawatts of wind power. That was the global figure. At the end of last year, it was about 490 gigawatts. That's huge growth. A second statistic is looking at the efficiency of our vehicle fleet here in the UK. So back then, when I started my career, we were in old money running vehicles which were on average about 30 miles to the gallon or less. That's over 200 grams per kilometre of CO2 emissions, for those of you who like metric units. And now we are well over 50 miles to the gallon. Unless you drive a VW, then perhaps you're at something else, but we're not quite sure what. So we've got work to do, but those two examples really do show how the energy system is changing. Much of that change is going in the right direction if you take a global perspective. And actually, to some, there's a lot of optimism around that actually the combination, as other speakers have said, of ICTs, falls in costs of renewables, of storage, and other things, and new business models will really just overthrow the current regime and the fossil fuel energy system we have. And change is just around the corner. The revolution, if you like, is beginning. But I think we do have to be a bit sober about this, because a lot of that change has been dependent on government policies in many, many countries. And certainly in some countries, including the UK, at UK level, there are now questions about how far political parties and governments are committed to that change. And that commitment is going to have to continue for any of those gains that we want to see from industrial strategy to be realised. So there's a lot of questions there as well. So what should the features of a good industrial strategy be? The green paper that's already been mentioned that the UK government published recently has some of those features, but I think I want to make a few comments on the way it was framed as well. I mean, the first thing that we said when we responded in my discussions with officials and representatives of political parties is that I think it's important to think about industrial strategy as something that is mission-oriented. In other words, that it focuses on where we're trying to get to as a society. So the transition to clean energy systems is a very, very good example of such a mission, as is dealing with an aging population and enabling people to lead not just longer lives, but healthier lives. So traditionally, industrial strategy is focused on sectors. It said, well, we have a strategy for the aerospace sector or the transport sector. And that's all very well, but actually, sometimes it loses sight of what is the overall goal here. And I think it's something that the strategy actually refers to in its introduction, that it's really important that it doesn't just reflect where we are now, which means that there's a risk that anybody with lobbying budgets can say, we want a piece of the action, whereas the new companies and new industries don't have quite so much of a say, that actually it looks to the future. So in his own introduction, Greg Clark, the Secretary of State, at least until recently, said, it's worth noting that many of the most important companies in the world today did not even exist 25 years ago. Unlike in the past, industrial strategy must be about creating the right conditions for new and growing enterprise to thrive, not protecting the position of incumbents. But actually in their critique, the House of Commons Business Committee, a couple of months later, said, actually, in the substance of the strategy, there's very little discussion of those political tensions and how they're going to be resolved. And I think that's something in the implementation that requires a lot more attention. And that leads on to another point, another feature which is important, which is a basis for making choices. So the strategy can't do everything for everybody. I think as one UK government civil servant said to me, everybody with a challenge in the energy sector, whether it be a company, an academic, or anything else, come to me with a problem, and the industrial strategy is the answer to that problem. And clearly, the strategy, with its limited political capital behind it, limited budget behind it, can't do everything for everyone. And I think it's actually worth recalling that sometimes for the UK, it might be actually good to say, well, perhaps we're not going to lead in a particular area because other governments, other taxpayers, other consumers have actually done a lot of the hard work for us, as is the case in solar PV. And now we can enjoy the benefits of lower cost solar panels and actually think about the downstream supply chain benefits the UK can get, but not necessarily be a leader in the manufacture of those solar panels. So thinking about exactly which technologies and areas within those overall missions we want to specialize in is very important. And therefore how we decide. And that leads on to the need to apply some criteria, thinking, well, how do we decide what choices to make? There are important criteria such as the impact on the UK energy system in terms of meeting our policy goals of low emissions, whilst having security and keeping bills as low as they can be, but also the global impact and export potential. There's also thinking about where our industrial and research strengths already lie and where they could develop in the future. So there are really good examples which actually tick a number of those boxes. So offshore wind has already been mentioned, where we have some strengths in the research base, increasing strengths industrially, and clearly some of the best resources in the world, and that's showing itself in the UK's leading position. Another area I might suggest is smarter electricity grids, where we do have some of the more innovative trial programs that have happened in the UK, and some of the companies that were at least 10 years ago not doing very much in this area are now actually paying a lot more attention to that. So my critique of the Green Paper in this respect is that it doesn't really have any framework of analysis or evidence in it about why choices have been made. Particular areas or sectors have been picked out, like the creative industries, nuclear power, low-carbon transport. Lots of those are laudable in themselves, but there's no sense of why those particular sectors have been chosen. So I think there is a risk that lobbying will take over rather than some analysis of saying, actually, we're doing these things for the good of the UK as a whole, rather than because somebody with a large budget has convinced particular ministers that this should be a priority. So my final set of comments is on what it should mean more specifically for the energy sector. I think the first point is particularly important for this conference, which is that it's important to take a systems approach to energy. We talk a lot about individual technologies, but actually, as others have said in this session already, it's the network infrastructures and how all the pieces fit together, which is important. The industrial strategy talks a lot about smarter grids and networks, but that is still an electricity conversation. So if we take the UK energy sector as a whole, we have to talk about heat in particular, which the strategy doesn't talk about, and it's extremely important when it comes to energy use and emissions, and also transport, which it does talk about a bit more. So that systems approach is really, really important. I was really pleased to see in the Scottish Energy Strategy draft that actually the systems approach is one of the 3 guiding principles that runs through that strategy. Of course, that now has to be put into practice. Another point is that I think given that industrial strategy often talks about the costs of energy to business and to householders, we do need a long-term approach to thinking about prices and bills. Now, clearly, as others have already said, we're in an election season, and we're now having a Groundhog Day moment with the debate about price caps for consumer bills. I would much rather the politicians thought about, well, how do we actually ensure that we develop and implement a long-term strategy for clean energy that actually minimizes the impacts on bills. I think what's got lost in all this discussion of thinking about short-term price controls is the fact that bills have actually fallen over the past 8 years. So the Committee on Climate Change published a very good analysis recently which showed, on average, household bills, for example, have fallen by £115 between 2008 and 2016. That is despite all the green levies that have been applied and despite paying for renewables and energy efficiency policies. One of the things that have countervailed that is the housing stock is getting more efficient. Now, clearly there is a long way to go. There is a very large policy hole on energy efficiency, certainly at UK government level, and that has to be addressed. But I think the thing that has got lost is that bills have been, on average, falling. I think the other point that's really important is any help that is needed should be targeted at those least able to pay, so those in fuel poverty and are living in houses which are really not fit for purpose in terms of keeping them warm in winter. I think the longer-term point, or the medium-term point, is that innovation is something that will drive down bills. So the cost falls we've seen in some of the renewables, in storage, and everything else is a longer-term driver in keeping bills down while we deploy low-carbon technologies. And I entirely agree with what a couple of other speakers, including the First Minister, have mentioned, which is that the idea that onshore wind shouldn't be allowed to be built across the UK as part of that strategy is frankly crazy. It's one of the cheapest ways of delivering low-carbon energy, and it should be in the mix with all the other technologies to see how we can deliver this at lowest cost. And again, we need a systems approach here. We published some research on this quite recently, looking at the system impacts of renewables, particularly intermittent renewables, and how much that might cost. And my researchers came to the conclusion that until we get to about 30% of UK electricity from intermittent renewables, not renewables as a whole, intermittent renewables, then we're probably talking around £10 a megawatt hour as the cost of integrating those renewables. At the moment, we're at about 14% of intermittent renewables, so we've got some way to go before those costs hit. The crucial thing, they said, was that you can minimize those costs by moving to a more flexible electricity system, incentivizing all the sources of flexibility, not just generation, demand-side response, interconnectors, and so on. And related to that, I think we need a sensible approach to financing. So when the government's thinking, whatever government we have, about reforming the rules and the next round of auctions and so on, thinking about how we do that at least cost. Again, the First Minister mentioned this idea of a subsidy-free contract. So thinking about how you deliver the lowest cost and allowing all of the technologies to compete, with some exceptions which are just hard to finance through those auction processes. Clearly, nuclear power is a long way from being ready to compete with other technologies. If it was allowed to, I suspect we wouldn't be getting any new nuclear power at all. And I think the capacity market has also been mentioned. We need reform of that so that all forms of flexibility are allowed to compete on an equal basis. At the moment, we have a tilted playing field where demand-side activities within the capacity market only get one-year contracts, whereas if you build a new power station, you get a 15-year contract. That can't be right from an economic perspective. My final point within this theme is government support for innovation. It's really important that the government still continues to support innovation. It's actually pleasantly surprising the UK government has put extra money through the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund into clean energy innovation in recent months. And so it's an extremely important part of the picture. But if you look around the world at the international evidence, those countries which have done best in delivering the clean energy revolution so far and have really reaped those industrial benefits have been very active in not just funding R&D, but actually in financing and bringing down the risk for private investors, the scaling up of technologies, the demonstration of technologies, and the deployment of those technologies. So we need to continue to do that in the UK. And it seems odd at the moment with the privatisation of the Green Investment Bank and some of the vehicles that the government has had at its disposal to do that, that those will no longer be available. Where actually, if you look around the world, that's been a key feature of some of the successful countries, is that they've used things like investment banks or innovation agencies like ARPA-E in the United States to deliver some of that. The final point is the need to build the bridge between the academic research base, which I live in, and the industrial research base, which no doubt many of you live in. Traditionally, it's, lots of people say that there is a disconnect between those two worlds in the UK. World-leading research base, but not enough bringing the great ideas out of that research base into commercial reality. We have the catapults, the family of catapults, to try and do that. It remains to be seen whether they will solve that problem. But certainly looking at how we can build an overlap between these two worlds rather than treating them separately within the innovation system is extremely important. So to conclude, I think the return of industrial strategy is extremely welcome. Clearly, we have a green paper. It has a lot of things right with it. I think, as somebody said, having energy as part of that in the heart of it is very welcome. But that has to now change under whatever government we have at UK level into industrial policy and to be implemented rather than just be at this rather high level. The transition to low-carbon energy is a key mission for that, but there's much more needed to implement it in terms of detailed policy. And I think one thing which is particularly important, which comes out in the Scottish energy strategy, is the need to really straddle between the new and the old. And clearly, in the Scottish strategy, they've tried to do that. But at some point, any government needs to have an analysis and some policies about how it's going to deal with the decline of incumbent infrastructures, incumbent firms, as they're no longer be needed. That's something that successive governments have failed to pay enough attention to, and some of the regional and employment impacts of that we can see around us in various parts of the UK. So I think that needs a lot more attention. And certainly as a final parting shot, I think looking at energy prices and price caps in the short term is not really the way to go, I think, in dealing with this. We really need a longer term perspective on how we're going to deliver clean energy, keep the system secure, and minimise the cost to consumers of doing so while maximising the benefits to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jim, and very important encouragement from Jim there around our focus around energy systems and their design and transition. Key point through all of what we've heard this morning is about innovation and collaboration being key to delivering this new energy future. And of course, last but not least, the idea of analysis and data-driven policy making. Sometimes it seems is lighter than it should be, not just in this country, but that connection between analysis and understanding to then prioritisation, the policy making is essential. Now, so we come now to the last speaker, and last but not least, I'm delighted again to welcome back to this conference Julian Leslie. Many questions have been raised around integration, grid performance and market. Julian may address some of these points. Delighted to say that he's here in the capacity as Head of Electricity Network Development from National Grid. Please join me in welcoming Julian to close the formal session. Thank you.
Thank you and good morning. Congratulations for staying in the room to hear the end of this session. Hopefully what I'm going to do is bring some of what we've heard already and bring that to life. As a grid system operator here in GB, we operate the UK, or the GB's electricity and gas networks, and we're very privileged positioned to see how this evolution or this revolution is actually impacting on day-to-day operation of the national grid. So I just really want to bring some of those issues to life and to really demonstrate that the concepts and the things that we were talking about even just 12 months ago are actually here and they're now and they're really live. And I guess what we are seeing on the grid is that we've talked about all these concepts and principles, and what we're seeing now is we're seeing them happening maybe for an hour, maybe for 2 hours, and as we heard, the 24 hours with no coal. The frequency and the duration of the issues that we've been talking about for many years are just happening, and as we move forward, we'll just see them happening more and more frequently and lasting for longer and longer. So it's great, really, that conferences such as this exist to get the right people in the industry together, to share our thoughts and our challenges and our innovation so that we can all learn together, because not any one individual can solve all these issues on their own. So really, I just want to talk about three things this morning. Firstly, to give our view as to how the energy industry is evolving and how we see it as being operating the national grid across GB. Secondly, how does that manifest itself into what myself and my colleagues have to deal with on a day-by-day, hour-by-hour, month-by-month basis? And finally, how is the system evolving, and what is our role as system operator, but what is your role as industry participants, but also what is the consumer role as to how we adapt to this changing marketplace and changing way in which we consume energy? So how are we seeing the markets evolving? The 3 Ds: decarbonisation, decentralisation, and digitisation. And we see that every day, all the time. If we think about decarbonisation, 38% now of all of the installed capacity in GB is renewable. Now that's not of generation quantities, but of installed capacity, 38%. In terms of decentralisation, 30% of all of the energy sources, electricity energy sources in GB are now distributed on the distribution network operator's network. Now that means, as a grid system operator, 30% of our sources of electricity are invisible to us and they're not participating directly in the balancing mechanism. And digitisation, we're seeing the advent now of smart meters, which enables the possibilities of managing your demand consumption at a time when renewable sources are high and the energy prices are low. And we're seeing the beginnings of that with British Gas. If you're a British Gas supplier, then you get free energy on a weekend, recognising the fact we need to increase our load on a weekend. If you're in WPD's network and you've got a smart meter, you can sign up to a sunshine tariff, which says you get lower cost of energy when the sun is shining. So this is the beginnings of that transformation whereby our consumption as consumers will change to when the generation is available. Whereas today, as consumers, we can do what we like when we like, and we match the generation to match that demand. On the gas side as well, we are the system operator for gas across GB, so I'm going to heavily focus on electricity, but just to mention gas, innovation is happening there as well. Through injecting renewable sources of gas onto our network, whether that be through hydrogen or biogas production, and really just mixing that and blending that with the North Sea gas to still ensure that we have a safe supply of gas, which is now has a high percentage of renewable content. But But the way we consume and engage with the system, energy system needs to change. We've got great examples in cities like Glasgow where people are really thinking about energy efficiency, where their energy comes from, and part of an integrated network. We've got the Nines project on the Scottish Islands, which is really looking at diesel combined with battery, combined with renewables, combined with consumer devices in the home and consumer behaviour. It's really beginning to build that fully integrated energy network that maximises the use of renewables and low carbon sources whilst reducing costs to consumers. We're also seeing with, in London, for example, the black cab. There's 27,000 black cabs in the streets of London, all currently consuming diesel. From August this year, you can buy a low-carbon, low-emission black cab. And by 2020, every black cab in London will be of a low-emission design with at least 70 miles of battery mileage in there. 27,000 vehicles in one city. That is a huge impact. And you can see that battery technology and low-carbon technology in cars is really expanding. And it's how we best integrate that into a network. So as a system operator, we can leverage the flexibility that that creates. The whole industry is changing as well. When I started in National Grid 25 years ago, we dealt with the big six post-privatisation. Today, my team, I manage all connections to the grid across GB. We're dealing with well over 200 customers now. Equally, the big six, but 194 of smaller organisations, many of which will be represented in the room here today. And our industry frameworks, they were designed in the CGB days, so pre-privatisation. They were then brought in sort of the early 90s at privatisation, when we were just dealing with large coal and large gas-fired power stations. There's a whole industry framework and regulation that's been set up around that long duration, long build processes. We're not in that world anymore. So we've got to work together as an industry and work with our regulators to ensure we can pick up the pace to make sure the frameworks that were designed for an era that is now long gone are fit for purpose for the future, and they're rapid, they're agile, and very responsive. All this is having an impact on physics. Physics still there, the markets, our transition can't change the laws of physics. So that's resulting in many operational challenges for us as a system operator through voltage management, constraint management, and system stability. And we need to bring new players into those markets. So these new technologies, a lot of them have a good set of power electronics there. So how can we use those power electronics to help us operate the system? And how can we create a market and a service provision that allows us to do so? Just thinking back to gas again, though, there's an ever-evolving and growing body of evidence that gas has a very important role to play in the future in terms of that residual balancing, but also to build flexibility into the network. And what we need to do is really understand the interplay between electricity and the gas networks, because at the time when the electricity network needs electricity to produce from gas, that's going to put a peak demand supply on the gas network. So as National Grid, seeing both those markets operate in both those networks, we are best placed to see that coordination. Also, with the move to decentralised generation, as I've said already, for us at National Grid, that's quite hard for us because we can't see this generation, we can't control it. We're trying to forecast it, but nobody in the UK has ever forecasted the impact of sun before. We're always grateful when we get it, whereas now it's a real impact on the generation that we see. So really working with the distribution network operators that historically have been a fit and forget. You fit the generation and it's fit to go, and when the generator wants to generate, it can do so. That's no longer the case, and we need to work with the distribution network operators to really understand what is operating on the networks and how it impacts on a national basis. So really that was a summary of how we see the market evolving. Massive revolutionary change, and this is all happening here and today. This is not some future state, this is what we see today. So what does that manifest itself into our day-to-day operation? Well, 2016, when I was stood here, if I'd have said last year, we're going to have 1 hour of operation with no coal on the network, I myself wouldn't have believed it. Many in the audience wouldn't have believed it either. But shortly after this conference last year, we had our first hour without coal generation. As we've heard several times this morning already, we've had 24 hours now without coal generation on the network. We've also operated the Scottish network without any fossil fuel generation, which again, people said that wasn't possible with the closure of Longanic, Kenzie, etc. But last summer, Peterhead was on outage for 6 weeks, and we had no fossil fuel generation in Scotland, and we were able to operate the network. The other Sunday, our minimum demand on the Sunday afternoon was lower than our demand that we see at 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning, because all the demand, as we see it, is now being supplied by solar. So the whole way in which we operate and think about peak and minimum demands on our network is really changing. We're also developing new services to help manage this. So we got demand turn-up services last summer for the first time. So if you're a large industrial user, you need to consume a certain amount of energy overnight, but you don't care when you do it, as long as by 6 o'clock in the morning you've pumped your pumps or whatever you need to do, then we are contracting with those guys to say, look, trust us, we'll give you your 2-hour window. Can we just work together to work out when that 2-hour window is going to be, so we can start to increase the demand at times when renewable generation is high. But also we are changing. On-demand TV pickups, those things are a thing of the past. Before, we used to tell stories around the end of EastEnders and the end of the 9 o'clock news and massive TV pickup and having to build facilities and services just to deliver that. That doesn't happen anymore. As a nation, as consumers, we are changing our behaviours, and we need to respond to all of that. But this all leads to great opportunities. For many of you in the room, there's new services that we require, which requires new technology. It needs new frameworks and new commercial contracts. But at the end of the day, that all leads to great opportunity. So how are we responding to this? We're having to look very widely, looking across Europe and looking at the role of interconnectors. Ofgem, with support of BEIS, are really encouraging interconnectors. We've got another 11 gigawatts in the pipeline to connect in the next sort of 6 to 7 years on top of the 4 gigawatts we have today, giving us access. So when it's windy and sunny in the GB, we've got a market to sell our renewable energy overseas. And similarly, on a dull, cloudy, still day, we can import that energy from Europe as well, and really working together to create a very decarbonised network. Flexibility is going to be key. Some of the previous speakers spoke about flexibility. In an intermittent renewable world, we need flexibility. We need short-term services. An example of this is our 200 megawatt enhanced frequency response contracts that we put out. We thought we're not really sure what the market's going to do about this, and we were staggered by the interest in the market. We had 1.8 gigawatts of service providers hunting for that contract for 200 megawatts. 200 megawatts of that enhanced frequency response, predominantly driven by battery technology, will be on the network within the next 12 months. And that's a phenomenal step forward, even from where we were 12 months ago. Working with our distribution network operators, understanding the services and the flexibility that the embedded generation can provide, either individually or as an aggregate, through aggregators such as Green Frog and other organisations such like that. How can they start to provide services we can operate the GB transmission system? And our role in network competition, we're thinking in the Queen's speech in a few weeks' time that competition and transmission will be part of that strategy to introduce competition to challenge the incumbent regulated monopolies for onshore transmission. So what is our role in the system operator in order of defining the need, working with the competitive allocated transmission owners to work out what the right solution is and what is the right cost? And the system operator is going to have a key role, as we do with the network optioneering assessment report right now, that indicates and makes recommendations to the investment for the GB transmission network. So I guess in summary, what I just wanted to do this morning was really highlight the fact that these issues we've been talking about for many years are live now. This isn't some future state in 5 or 10 years' time. We are seeing all of the issues we've talked about for many years. They're live and relevant today. As I say, what we're going to see is more of them and lasting for longer. The market is changing very fast. We need to respond as an industry in the same speed. We need regulation and commercial frameworks to respond in that same pace. And flexibility is key. So using the power electronics that comes with all the renewable sources, using smart cities and smart consumptions and fully integrated energy networks, using that flexibility to provide services and ever-growing pot and size of market that we can all benefit from are absolutely key. So I really encourage you all to engage in the next 2 days to really understand how your projects can impact on a national basis and how your products and your services can help us operate the system for today and for tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Well, this is definitely the best session so far. And we're right on time, colleagues, so well done. So, just before we leave the hall, just a couple of things. You will be aware from the programme that all of the next group of sessions begins at 11 o'clock. We have such a range of offerings given the breadth of the conference. It starts to include offshore wind, marine renewables, including a brokerage event for companies and future employees to meet, the Great Debate and the Sustainable City Stream. Innovate UK has an infrastructure systems innovation showcase. We have energy for the farming community, onshore wind, finance and funding, and energy systems, which has been a key point for discussion this morning, and the first Smart Urban Mobility Solutions session with a keynote address by Humza Yousaf, who is the Scottish Minister for Transport and the Islands. So plenty to look at. Have a look at your programme, see those which you are going to go to. First of all, let me thank you very much for seeing through the whole session. I think you'll agree with me, it's been fascinating, some very high quality contributions. And to conclude, please join me in showing a great appreciation for the panel's input. Thank you very much indeed.